Welcome to R&R Living Life. Here, Rick and I are in the centre of Australia. Some would say in the middle of nowhere, and they would be right in some respects. But this area has so much to offer if you are looking for iconic landmarks, rich red country and vast arid regions. Today's episode will mainly be the road trip to Kings Canyon in the very heart of the Red Centre, and with our visit to Kathleen Springs in the afternoon. After an early start, Rick and I left Erldunda Roadhouse and made our way along the Lassiter Highway, named after Lewis Hubert Lassiter, who claimed to have discovered a fabulously rich gold reef west of Catajuca. The highway runs alongside the southern parts of the Baystow and Kernot Ranges. We crossed numerous floodways with markers to 1.4 metres, red sand ridges and picturesque countryside. There was so much grass, with the open country and the flat terrain between the swales covered in green pick. About 55 kilometres west of Erldunda was Mount Ebenezer, a cattle station, while alongside the highway was the deserted, derelict and destroyed Mount Ebenezer Roadhouse. The lease for the property shares a boundary with other pastoral leases, including Angus Downs to the west, Linda Vale to the south, Erldunda to the southeast, and Palmer Valley to the northwest. The Lassiter Highway bisects the property from east to west and takes its name from Mount Ebenezer that stands at 702 metres, that is within the station's boundaries. The peak was named after Ebenezer Flint, who delivered supplies to the telegraph stations in the area in 1871, and is located near the eastern end of the range's western ridge. The pastoralist Richard Warburton took up Erldunda Station to the east of Mount Ebenezer in 1822 and is thought to have passed through the area while mustering stray cattle. The Mount Ebenezer Roadhouse was in a sad state of neglect and ruin. It was closed for several months in 2012. When William O'Donnell signed a lease to reopen the roadhouse, it is said that he was driven from the property by a spear-wielding Indigenous man. The owners of the roadhouse terminated the contract shortly afterwards, and since then the roadhouse has been deserted. Such a waste of a key business on such a long stretch of the Lassiter Highway. From Erldunda, we had been following the Lassiter Highway west for about 115 kilometres before we turned off onto the Erldunda Road to head towards Kings Canyon. The Kernot Range near the junction of the highway and Erldunda Road stretches for about 18 kilometres from the northwest to the southeast and is mostly one long ridge of bent and folded sedimentary rock. Today's travels were on a fully sealed route, not the best in places, with the edges of the road worse for wear and quite rough, especially the drop-off, the bitumen. We had been on the lookout for camels, but with the amount of feed and the rain the area had had, camels were not to be seen. The road into Kings Canyon was an enjoyable experience, over undulating rises, sand ridges, corners that gave stunning scenery, straight stretches, creeks with piles of sand where it had been washed across the road, and best of all the ever-changing countryside, not to forget the desert oaks in all their glory, especially the young oaks like hairy cousin It. Low sand ridges, spinifex bushes, desert oaks, and the truly red earth. Who could ask for a more unique country than this? The scenery was stunning, the colours amazing, and the landscape fascinating. Stretches of road were bordered by rocky outcrops, then thick acacia shrublands, with the country ever changing the closer we drove to Kings Canyon Resort, with more creeks and gullies interspersed with open plains before we began following the George Gill Range, an extension of the McDonnell Range, consisting mainly of sandstone. In the southern part of the range we could see where there could be springs and waterholes by the eucalypt trees that usually border the edge of waterways. We crossed waterways with 2-metre signage, with sand piled to the side where it had been cleared from across the bitumen. The edges of the bitumen were sharp, and we were glad we didn't have to get off the road, even though the sides of the road were cleared for some distance. The changing vegetation of the area, uniquely adapted to the arid environment, was constantly changing as we crested hills and drove over waterways, and then the George Gill Range began to the east. Being near to the middle of the day, the position of the sun didn't give us the vivid colours of red, but the more prominent dark greens of the vegetation. We then moved away from the range through spinifex country and open grassland covered with buffel grass, with the acacias that were well suited to this arid landscape. We passed flat open country covered with buffel grass and introduced grass, though good fodder for cattle, but is a threat to native species such as quandong and grass trees in the area. When burnt, the buffel grass burns more fiercely, which damages the nearby native plants. The desert oaks adapted for survival with their long and needle-like foliage, juvenile trees, thin and straight, looking like feather dusters, shaped to collect water on the lower slopes and swales between red sand dunes. The thick, deeply furrowed corky bark, when mature, protects the tree from fire, and it can regenerate from epicormic buds. Such a hardy, striking and intriguing tree that evolves to become a sturdy tree of around 10 to 15 metres, visually very different from the juvenile tree. We passed through Kings Creek Station, about 35 kilometres from Kings Canyon. The station, covering an area of around 2,200 square kilometres, was originally a cattle station and camel property, but now tourism is its main business, hence the helicopter and huts. Kings Creek, which flows at the eastern end of the George Gill Range, created Kings Canyon over millions of years. The first European to visit the area was Ernest Giles in 1872. He named the range after his brother-in-law, George Gill, who had helped him fund the expedition. The range was stunning. I can imagine the inland sea breaking up against the cliffs, eroding the landscape into such a powerful and dramatic range. The hard, pure sandstone plateau is believed to have been formed from wind-blown sand dunes around 360 million years ago. This is evident from the cross-bedding, which shows layers of sand deposited at different angles over time. A period of mountain building around 320 million years ago tilted and thrust up the area, forming fault lines in the Morini sandstone. These faults then weathered into the cracks that created the modern beehive domes and features like Kings Canyon. It was impressive. About 20 kilometres from Kings Canyon, we passed burnt spinifex country alongside the road, with burnt tree trunks highlighted against the red sand country. The contrast between the burnt and unburnt country was amazing. Controlled burning is used to manage the country by helping to reduce hazardous fuel loads of dry and old grass, reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfires in the hot, late dry season, and helps to regenerate landscapes and protect wildlife. We arrived at the Discovery Resort just on midday and set up Gidget. After lunch we headed back to Kathleen Springs, passing a dingo on the road just outside of the Discovery Park. From the car park, a walking track leads to a spring-fed waterhole at the head of Kathleen Gorge, and included interpretive signs about Aboriginal culture and the cattle industry along the way. Kathleen Springs is a permanent waterhole in Kathleen Gorge. At the beginning of the track we passed through several plant communities, from mulga flats and riverine woodlands to shrublands on the slopes and sparsely vegetated ranges, as well as the remnants of an old set of yards. The undulating red rock trail took us along a narrow but richly vegetated corridor full of plants including quandong, bush plum and wild fig. The sun on the walls of the gorge were amazing. The rich reds and orange colours were striking against the greens. The trail is a return walk of about 2.5 kilometres along a sill track with a boardwalk as we got closer to the spring. The quiet and peace, the call of the little birds, just the serenity of the place was incredible. The first Europeans, Ernest Giles, Samuel Carmichael and Alec Robinson, visited the area in 1872. Giles was later granted the first pastoral lease over country which now includes the present-day National Park. In 1882 he sold his unworked lease, which later became Tempe Downs Station. Early pastoral enterprises in the region experienced a shaky start. By 1889, world depression and a run of dry years had caused a drop in beef prices. As drought conditions worsened, the scene was set for conflict between pastoralists and displaced Aboriginal people. In August 1896, Tempe Downs Station moved 2,500 head of cattle onto Reedy Creek and Kathleen Springs at a time when Aboriginal people were also converging on the well-watered George Gill Range. As escalation in cattle spearing soon followed and police patrols responded by tracking down and arresting offenders. While cattle killing persisted until 1920, the stations also prospered from the skills of many Aboriginal stockmen who used Kathleen Gorge to trap cattle and horses. The trapping yards were constructed in 1962 and the final muster of stock took place in 1983 when the National Park was established. Kathleen Springs was one of several natural watering points along the range. On the way into the gorge we passed an old stockyard. It was here that stockmen used a fence across the narrow gorge to trap cattle. The fence had a spear or non-return gate, which was wide open most of the time to allow cattle to move back and forth to drink. Come mustering time, the spear gate was closed, with cattle able to move in but not out and became trapped. The stockman then worked the cattle on horseback to rope and brand them. In the early 1960s, a track from Alice Springs to Kings Canyon was constructed, which meant that cattle could be transported to market by truck. A ramp was built for loading these cattle. The days of driving cattle to market on horseback were numbered once trucks became the major way to move cattle to market. Further on we came across the remains of a stock watering point. The dry riverbed of Kathleen Creek snakes its way here into the George Gill Range for about 1.5 kilometres, leading to a deep waterhole. It was only after rain that the area had good quality cattle feed, with a permanent water supply pumped from Kathleen Springs by windmill and stored in a tank, ensuring the return of stock each day to drink. During the cool of the night, cattle would graze up to 16 kilometres out from the tank before returning for water. A fence was put in place to prevent them from moving further down the gorge and fouling the water in the springs. Water was piped from a tank to trough, but all that remains today was sections of a large concrete slab of the original tank. I was amazed by the large flock of zebra finches that had flocked to the water lying on top of the cement around the old tank. With the amount of feed around, there sure was plenty of seeds for them to eat. The tall rocks channeled us further into the gorge, over the creek in places, and then along a boardwalk protecting the fragile area before the spring. I could only imagine the water flowing over the top of the fall into the pool beneath. The permanent spring-fed waterhole at the end of the track was cool and refreshing and acted as a refuge for many plants and animals. Rick and I stopped often to take in the sheer natural features of our surrounds. I was especially enjoying the twitter of birds. What an afternoon it was turning out to be. As we made our way back along the track, the sun had begun to sink lower to the horizon, making the rock walls a stunning red in places. Then, to see a lone tree perched on top of the cliff, so much tenacity to cling onto the rocks. I spent quite a bit of time trying to photograph a butterfly that was busy moving between the grass stalks, and the zebra finches that kept just far enough away from me making it hard to get a clear photo. When we arrived back at the tank, the finches were enjoying an afternoon bath, an amazing sight. As we neared the end of the track, we were back at the stockyards, where we stopped and reminisced about stock camps Rick had been in during his younger years, and wondered if any were still around, though we didn't think so, as the industry has changed so much since we were living in rural areas. Though the walk into Kathleen Springs was short, it was certainly well worth the time. The signage along the way gave an insight into the area, explaining both Aboriginal and pastoral history of the area. As the sun sank further to the horizon, we returned to camp, surrounded by desert bloodwoods, mulga trees and spinifex grass. There was just enough afternoon left for us to walk up to the lookout, with unrivalled views of Carmichael's Crag at the western end of the famous George Gill Range, to watch as the incredible sandstone changed colour as the sun dipped behind the peak. The spectacular hues of red, orange, purple and pink were gradually cast onto the sandy landscape before millions of stars began to appear overhead. It was an amazing way to end such an exceptional day here in the very heart of the Red Centre, within sight of one of the most impressive sights in the country. I hope you have enjoyed this episode about the country as we made our way to Kings Canyon. Give us a thumbs up if you have. Join us next time as I face my fear of heights and take on the Kings Canyon Rim Walk. Take care and enjoy your journey. Thanks for watching. Rick and Rosemary. R&R Living Life.